This is a Restless Music podcast. Shining Rails, an essay by Victorian Railwayman Keith Foster.
To state the obvious, the most noticeable thing about any railway, be it large or small, are the rails on which the trains run. But who really gives a thought to those rails? We all love watching or riding trains, taking photographs of locomotives, new or ancient, stations, bridges, old or new rolling stock, even signals and other railway items. Let's think a little bit about the major feature, the very rails themselves. Any two cities, take Melbourne and Perth for example, must be physically connected by at least two rails. That's a lot of rail when you think about it. Rail must be made of a good quality steel that will be strong, must resist wear, and not be liable to crack in extremes of temperature or when being curved. Rails are rolled in steel mills in long continuous lengths, but are cut shorter for delivery. For example, in the USA in the days when 40-foot rail wagons were the norm, rail always came in 39-foot lengths to fit in or on one of them. In Australia, with our shorter rail wagons, a similar principle applied. These short lengths of rail were laid by hand in the days of manual labour. When being laid, a rail was carried by about 20 men, 10 on each side, each pair of whom carried the rail by special T-shaped lifting tongs. And it could be pretty heavy, and was also difficult when hobbling over sleepers. Rail is not supplied by measurement, but by its weight. We used to refer to a rail size in pounds per yard. It came in weights from as low as 14 pounds, through 20, 30, 45, 60, 80 and so on, up to 387 pounds per yard for the rails for large overhead travelling cranes. A common size on our older railway lines was 80 pounds per yard, while 60 was used on light branch lines, with 130 pounds per yard being used on heavy freight lines. Nowadays its weight is in kilograms per metre of length. Although the conversion factor is actually 2.015, you will be close enough if you merely divide by 2. 80 pounds per yard rail thus becomes 40 kilograms per metre rail, and so on. A 20-foot length of 80-pound rail weighs roughly 500 pounds. These short lengths of rail were joined together with bolts, nuts and fish plates. They were then spiked to the sleepers, which today are usually called cross ties or sometimes just ties. Slight gaps were left between the ends of adjoining rails to allow for heat expansion. This gap brought about the well-known clickety-clack sound, which was mostly well-loved, but not by those who lived near a railway line which was busy at night. This has disappeared with the advent of continuously welded rail. In my days on the railways, back in the 1940s, rails at Spotswood were being welded into approximately 200-foot lengths and placed on special trains which consisted of about 8 flat wagons. There would be about 10 rails side by side, carried on special bearers on these wagons. It was fascinating to look back over the tender and watch these rails snaking around the curves behind your engine, following faithfully, even on an S-bend, rather in the manner of a long snake. The rails which sit on rollers are only fixed to 1 or 2 wagons in the centre of the train, leaving the ends free to allow for the curves. It takes more rail length to go around a curve than to take a straight line. If the rails were fixed to the end wagons, they could pull the central ones off the rails on a curve. Naturally, they are restrained to prevent any sideways movement. Today, the laying of rail is done mostly by special track machines. The crushed stone ballast is firmly tamped under and around the cross ties to firmly secure them in place. The ballast also serves as a resilient road bed, and it also provides for drainage. At times it must be cleaned when it becomes clogged with dirt. Cross ties are today often made of concrete, especially good for white ant areas, and some are made of steel. Even composition or plastic ones have been tried experimentally in countries overseas. The long lengths of rail are welded into continuous lengths on the job. I have read that as much as 100 miles has been used in a single length in some countries. The rails are attached to the sleepers or cross ties with special devices. One common one, in the shape of a pretzel, is called a pandroll clip. All of this is necessary to control the expansion and contraction of the rail as the temperature varies. How is this done if there are no rail gaps? Ideally, the rails should be laid at somewhere near the mean temperature in the area. This is midway between the highest and lowest of the expected temperatures. Obviously, this may not always be possible, so in some places the rails are artificially heated or cooled before laying. What is the expansion rate of steel? In my old days in the railway blacksmith shops, the smiths worked on a rule of thumb which says that a 1 foot long piece of iron or steel will expand by 1/16 of an inch when heated to blood red. Or if you like, a 300mm piece will increase by 1.5mm. Of course, rails never reach this sort of temperature, but the same principle applies. In some countries, the outdoor temperature can vary between less than 0 degrees Celsius to about 50 degrees Celsius. These extremes can alter the length of the rail quite considerably. For instance, I have read that a rail 1 mile long would expand in length by 4.5 feet between the two extremes that I quoted, from 0 to 50 degrees Celsius. There are many scientific calculations about expansion with temperature rise, but I would not bore you with them even if I fully understood them. Essentially, the rails must be firmly and securely fixed to the cross ties, which in turn must be firmly embedded in well-tamped ballast, so that the rails can only expand up, down and sideways instead of in length, thus making them microscopically thicker. This really means that they become compressed as the temperature rises, so that when they are being laid, they must be in a stress-neutral condition so as to allow for contraction as well as expansion. This stress-neutral temperature is usually at the upper 2/3 point of the expected temperature range. Simple, isn't it? Of course, there are sometimes special provisions made for some expansion using specially shaped angled ends on the two adjoining rails. These are called breather points. You will by now see that the safety of a modern railway depends on the integrity of its rails and their fastenings, not to mention the care and skill of those who lay them, and also of those who must inspect and maintain those tracks. With our continuously welded rails, we have lost that old familiar clickety-clack, but for those who sleep in homes near a busy railway line, it's a great blessing. In spite of all this, sometimes rail can come adrift. I've seen overseas photos of rails with so-called sun kinks, where the pairs of rail have zigzagged from side to side over a distance of a few hundred metres. Unusual, yes, but not the sort of thing you would want if you were in a high-speed passenger train, or even if you were merely standing anywhere near a heavy freight train if it's travelling on those tracks. Fortunately, we do not get these extremes in Australia. So the next time you travel by train, give a thought to those rails.
I remember driving wheels, pounding in the night, flailing rods, whistle wails, she steams with all her might. Stinking smoke fills up my lungs, the heat is far from kind. The fireman casts his shadow on the trailing smoke behind. Clouds of steam and headlights beam, we're bringing through the mail, racing through the darkness on the shining rails. to feed the fire's demands for more. Now I dream of days of steam down on the Western Line. Looking back, the work was hard, but oh, the life was fine. Clouds of steam and headlights beam, we're bringing through the mail, racing through the darkness on the shining rails. Clouds of steam and headlights beam, we're bringing through the mail, racing through the darkness on the shining rails. Racing through the darkness on the shining rails. Racing through the darkness on the shining rails. Through the darkness on the shining rails. Racing on the shining rails. Racing on the shining rails. Shining rails on the shining rails.
You have been listening to Shining Rails, an essay by Keith Foster, originally written for Eastern FM's programme Roundabout with the Whistleblowers in 2005. Keith Foster was a Victorian railwayman, musician, writer and community broadcaster. Narration and production by Roger Eilert. The song Shining Rails was written by Keith Foster, Penny Davies and Roger Eilert, and performed by Roger Eilert with Penny Davies, Lee Williams and Jordan Eilert. This has been a Restless Music podcast.